Rend, slaughter, devour your enemies. There is no other way to survive. You cannot escape your hunger, warriors of purgatory.
1994 was an important year for Atlus and the Shin Megami Tensei or MegaTen series. Both Shin Megami Tensei 2 and Shin Megami Tensei If had both been released, but now they had to decide what to do next. While there were ideas pitched for a third mainline title, the original plan was just to make 1, 2, and If and then conclude the series. However, they decided to take what they'd learned and use that knowledge to rebuild it. Unfortunately, that took them a lot longer than they expected, and they ended up working on various project ideas for years without much to show for it. That didn't mean that Atlus wasn't putting out games though. Katsura Hashino worked on Shin Megami Tensei If when he joined Atlus, and he was named as the director for a spin-off project based on some of If's most popular mechanics. When Shin Megami Tensei If came out, its school setting was well received, so we decided to start a new series that dealt with the inner struggles of young adults, which became Revelations Persona. The first Persona game came out in 1996, with Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Persona 2 Eternal Punishment following shortly afterwards in 1999 and 2000 respectively. But even 6 years later, there wasn't a single mainline MegaTen title in sight. The two consoles that they were targeting for development were the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, but they would need a more powerful system to fully incorporate all of their ideas. When the 32-bit consoles, PlayStation and Saturn, were released, it took a while for us to create a different kind of Megami Tensei game, one we hoped would appeal to a wider audience. We had great ideas that were incorporated into the game and which we developed to the fullest potential at the time, but the PS2 specs were necessary to complete this massive project as we envisioned. The development team was struggling, so they started experimenting in order to increase their understanding of 3D graphics. They started working on Cerberus, a research and development project that would debut at that year's Tokyo Game Show. Up until now, no MegaTen game used 3D models, so Cerberus served as a test for modeling and demon animations, and gave them experience working with the PlayStation 2. Right after the Tokyo Game Show, they started building what would eventually become Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. They were able to put all the ideas that they had been working on for the past several years to good use. Once the game entered full development sometime in 2002, it only took Atlus about a year to finish it. But Nocturne wasn't the only game in development at the time. There was a project titled New Goddess that had actually started being developed before Nocturne. The purpose of the project was to make a Shin Megami Tensei game that was more appealing to the average gamer. They would try to accomplish this by keeping the tone and themes that made MegaTen games while increasing its production value. In 2000, Atlus reached out to Yuko Dai, a novelist, in order to write the game's story. While she'd never done game writing before, she decided to try it out, and her concept for the game was accepted by Atlus. She worked with Tadashi Satomi, who had experience writing on Persona games, to write the story. Her outline was broken into chapters, and she did a short write-up through the story's first boss battle in order to get a better sense of the story and the game's world. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, Dai had to lead the project, which left the game's writing into Tomi's hands. New Goddess developers were able to leverage experience that was gained in the production of Nocturne in order to tune the game in the direction that they wanted. This process may have been easier than it otherwise would have been because both games shared the same director, Katsura Hashino. When developing New Goddess, the development team was split, roughly, into 6 divisions: the Battle Team, System Team, Event Team, Field Team, Effect Team, and Character Team. I imagine that the reason why they describe the divisions as rough is because some of the teams may have had to work either extremely closely with one another or had to develop elements that technically fell under another team's umbrella. A good example of this are the Battle, System, and Effect teams. Although what the Battle Team does appears to be the most self-explanatory, their role may cover more than you'd expect. According to Daisuke Kaneda, the Battle Team Supervisor, Battle as the name suggests, is the part where the characters fight against the enemy. In this team, we were talking about system rather than battle. Not only battles, but also things that can be obtained by battle, and the results screen after the battle. We managed everything that affected the outcome of the battle, such as what was sold in the store. We called it a system. The battle team also may have been the most impacted by what was being done in Nocturne. Director Hashino said, "Please make the pre-turn of Shin Megami Tensei 3 more evolved to make it easier to play and more interesting." It was ordered. In SMT3, players were just watching after they finished attacking, so we thought about some factors that would give the battle an advantage as soon as we were ready. As long as you make it with the same members, it's natural that you want to make it better than the previous one. So by adding new weight and linkage skills, we increased the sense of team play and added elements such as Eat and Fear that were intertwined with the worldview there. I think that this has evolved into a pre-turn battle because it has worked well. After that, my theme was battle that does not stop the user's thinking. It is important to have a good tempo in a tense battle, called a pre-turn battle. We focused on sharpening the stress-free battle tempo that was well received in SMT3. I adjusted the battle production and meticulous meeting. The effects team would work with the battle team in order to ensure that everything looks smooth. An example of this is what the effect team did in order to sharpen the presentation of the weight action. according to Akiko Koto, the effects team lead. That's right, I tried to eliminate it. I tried to avoid the long circling camera and make it so that the camera switches are crisp. Instead of creating effects and directing, for example, I focused on making the effects look beautiful, not only in the place where the effect is showing, but also on the entire screen. A new system that they worked on was mantras, which are packages of skills that you can obtain in-game. During battle, you'll obtain Atma points, or AP, for whatever mantra that you've selected. Once a mantra has absorbed enough AP, it's considered mastered, and you can equip any of the skills that you now have access to. The battle system in New Goddess is a variant of the press turn system used in Nocturne. The core elements are the same, but there are a few things that make this version unique. Simply put, the press turn system functions by giving every combatant a turn to perform an action. Each turn is visualized on the screen, allowing you to see when the characters in your party and the characters that you're fighting will perform their actions. Before each set of turns, you'll select the actions of every party member. While most combatants, bosses excluded, are only given one turn at a time, you can obtain more by exploiting enemy weaknesses or landing critical attacks. There are two things that set this game system apart from Nocturne's: combos and transformations. In this game, assuming that you have the appropriate number of turns, multiple characters can combine their skills in order to perform powerful combo attacks. The game's characters can also transform from their demon forms into their human forms, and vice versa, with each form having its own strengths, weaknesses, and types of attacks. Kazuhisa Wada was the design lead for the event team, and he worked with Tadashi Satomi, who's in charge of the scenario, in order to create the game's events. All of the event's background music and sound effects would be handled by Shoji Meguro, the composer for the entire project, not just the event team. Due to how close the two projects were to each other, it's not surprising that developers of New Goddess were thinking a lot about Nocturne. And when Tatsuya Yabuda, who worked on the event storyboards, described the core production concept for the events, that was his point of comparison. If Nocturne symbolizes stillness, this project is the instinctive movement. On the eve of its creation, Nocturne portrayed a pre-dawn world, filled with the power and symbolism of chaos. I asked myself in a closed world, and I create a new universe from the last remaining primitive thing. It was necessary to express the theme of dynamic activities hidden in quiet. This led to the pursuit of a primitive and solid production that stripped away waste and put symbolism and meaning into a single layout. As a result, Nocturne took the technique of making pictures like impression illustration video. I think that it is finished with a tasteful expression, coupled with a unique texture and air feeling. It is a gift of the sense, competence, and commitment of all the staff. This time takes a more evolved and dynamic approach to directing, under the theme of awakening and change. I was asked to vividly portray characters who awaken to the ego, awaken to their peers, and awaken to the meaning of life while being confused and suffering. Change, awakening, emotion, instinct. In order to express these, in addition to directing stillness full of emotion, we take a directing approach of movement that pushes out intense action and character qualities. As for what events are, according to Satomi, to put it simply, an event is the part where characters such as Surf and Heat talk and proceed with the story. The event designer's job was to create the event or cutscene animation. Our job in design is to make it into a 3D animation. First, we decide what kind of production we want and draw a storyboard according to the scenario. We also create 3D characters in parallel. Then, based on the finished storyboard, we add animation to the characters and the camera and build the scene. Then, once that's finished, all of the music and sound effects will be added. They also decided to bring in some additional help for storyboarding. Ichiro Itano, a famous animator, helped them a lot with the opening sequence. This time, we asked the famous animation director, Ichiro Itano, for a storyboard, and it has been considerably enhanced in terms of direction. The opening scene was especially strong, but the content drawn by Mr. Itano was both wonderful and tremendous, and it was very difficult to maintain the quality that content demanded. The game's setting provided the sound team with an interesting challenge. I am also particular about the details of the sound. For example, the clothes worn by the characters are supposed to be new materials. It's not rubber, it's not nylon, it's not plastic, it is the setting. Therefore, the sound of new materials is still new materials, and the sound of the clothes was made by recording and processing the sound of actual clothes made of the latest materials. One of the things that made the New Goddess project different from other games that Atlus had worked on is the amount of voice acting that they were including, particularly in their events. At first, in order to have something to work with, members of the production staff actually voiced the characters themselves. But even when the voice actors were brought in, they struggled to match the tone that the event team was looking for, according to Wada and Satomi. This time I'm taking the expression before and after emotions are exposed. There are no ups and downs of emotions. This time we created an event with full voice. It's an expression that cannot be done without a voice expressing the undulation of emotions with a stick reading of lines. However, this expression was very difficult, and we and the voice actors struggled. Well, this production comes to life in the later scenario development and theme. Trying something new appeared to have paid off, because the voices added even more realism to the events. The voices that played during the first event in our RPG, I think that this was able to express a full sense of realism in the event because of our gorgeous cast. In fact, all the staff who were at the scene were in tears because of the audio recording of an event that made them cry. While they weren't used to working with so many voices, the designers were able to take what they learned about 3D character modeling from Nocturne and apply it to New Goddess. But there were other challenges that they had to deal with. This time we also created character models with Nocturne's know-how. I think that it was finished in 3-dimensional modeling without discomfort and without missing Kaneko's taste. This work was really hard because of the large number of characters and being able to take full advantage of the pseudo level of detail. A field is any area where the game's characters can walk around freely. Areas where you can encounter enemies or dungeons, and areas where you could progress the story were called city maps. The job of the field team, according to Atsushi Watanabe, a field planner, is to make the structure and picture of a city and dungeon. But we are also in charge of events to keep you walking, deciding where to place rare bosses, setting up field hunts, which is an extra mode in this game. Field hunts are a mini-game in which your characters transform into their demonic forms in order to devour demons. The goal is to consume as many of these weaker demons as possible in order to trigger a battle with Mitama. If you're able to devour Mitama, you will receive a large amount of AP, but you don't have a lot of time because they will randomly flee from battle. Although it ended up being just a part of a minigame, transforming into your demonic form was initially going to be as easy as pressing a button. What I was worried about was how to make field hunting interesting. To tell the truth, at first you would be able to demonize anywhere in the field, turn into a demon when you would just press the L2 button. It was a form. However, there was a problem that some could not concentrate on the main part of the game if they could do it anywhere. So in order to focus on the main objective, hunts were placed at the end of a mysterious wall and turned into an extra minigame. I think that it is now possible to enjoy it as a separate part from the main game. I think you enjoyed Surf walking around the field because it was cool. The field team also adapted the way that they designed dungeons based on their experiences with Nocturne. They wanted to make it easier to add save points to dungeons. In the previous game, Shin Megami Tensei 3, the terminal and spring of recovery were rooms, so we had to take up space in the dungeon for them, and in fact we had a hard time installing it. In this work, we made a type of shape that can be placed on the aisle, so it can be placed almost anywhere. So we were able to put it in places where you could save where you want to. In order to produce the backgrounds for the fields, Alice was working with Kusanagi, a background art design company. I think that the very beautiful paintings have imbued a new visual taste that has not been found in the series until now. In converting such a beautiful picture into 3D, I made it with the feeling of high reproducibility and being able to show it more beautifully. Personally, I like the scenery of Sahasrara, so when you visit Sahasrara, please take a look at the background carefully. The difficult part of field planning is pulling it all together, as Daiki Ito, the field planning lead, explains in an explanation of the dungeon creation process. First, the planner creates a concept sheet. This is based on the scenario and what kind of content is necessary in the situation of the dungeon. We will think about the player. Next, create a structural model. This is also created by the planner, which uses 3D tools to create places for players to walk, floors, walls, etc. At the same time, you write scripts to create simple events, gimmicks, etc. Here we will also verify whether the proposed script is interesting or not. In other words, it has to be interesting at this stage, so it's a big mountain to climb. It is also a time where my stomach hurts. When a structural model is completed to some extent, the designer creates a background model as a parallel work. Everything about appearance, such as light and texture, is created here. Then the background model and the structural model are synthesized, and objects such as desks and chairs are added to the background model, and the structure model is modified accordingly. It is very rough, but I made a dungeon like this. The character team is responsible for putting the game's character designs into the game. One of their primary focuses was actually on the design of the game's various demons, so some people called the team the Devil Team or Devil Squad. Two important members of the character team were Kaori Okita, who is the demon designer in the Devil Team, and Makoto Kitano, who is in charge of design direction and led the Devil Team. Our part is specialized in characters that appear in battle, so it's not strictly a character team. Basically, I specialize in making demons. The main human characters, such as Surf, are customized for battle based on what the event team has created. On the other hand, the demons that appear in the event are using things that our team made and customized. All the demons are made by our team, so we were called Devil Squad during development. Everything about demons is made by the Devil Team. One of the hardest things for the character team to do was to make visually impressive designs without destroying the game's frame rate. Our games are sold based on their tempo, so we try to make the devils light so as not to damage it. If the number of polygons is too large, the processing will be dropped. I don't sacrifice the appearance, I don't drop the tempo of the game. I make it with the balance at the last minute. But sometimes I cut the polygon count too much and say, I'm poor, so please increase it a little more. Even if I say tempo first, I always think of the devil first, because it is the Devil Squad with the devil. The staff continued to work hard all night to see how many more bytes and polygons could be put out. Similarly, they also had to make sure that the demons that they created would actually fit within the battle area. While the team liked to experiment with demons that had interesting tricks or gimmicks, sometimes they would struggle to implement those ideas into the game. As mentioned earlier, the game sound was primarily handled by Shoji Meguro. According to Meguro, new technology made a large impact on the development of New Goddess's music and sound. A-Track 3. A-Track, or Adaptive Transform Acoustic Coding, is audio compression technology developed by Sony. And the second iteration of this technology, which was named A-Track 3, was significantly better than its predecessor when it was released in 1999. For example, using original A-Track compression, you could fit about 79 songs on a 700 megabyte CD. With A-Track 3, you could fit about 176 songs on that same disc without losing audio quality. And this increase in efficiency helped the entire development team. A major evolution in terms of sound was the adoption of stream playback using A-Track 3. In fact, it is only combat background music or BGM, and a few others that are using A-Track 3. But A-Track 3 has excellent sound quality, and thanks to the extra space that was left in the sound memory now, the field and event teams could implement BGM using built-in sound sources, which allowed us to allocate a lot of capacity to special effects. We hit 3 birds with 1 stone while increasing sound quality. The playback of live instruments, which was difficult with conventional built-in sound sources, was also able to be played in the whole game with considerable sound quality. And speaking of live instruments, Shoji Meguro thought that it was important that they be used in order to fit the theme of the game. The worldview of raw instinct, that you cannot live unless you eat each other. The only way to express it in music is with the late 60s and 70s rock. It was the music that was conscious of the sound of that time. The game's opening theme was the song Prey. It was sung by Sarah's voice actress Hoko Kawashima and was used as the core musical theme for the game. As mentioned previously, the New Goddess project was supposed to be a game to introduce new players to MegaTen. So, in line with that objective, Kazuhisa Wada actually wanted to make a game for players of all ages. After all, because I wanted to touch as many people as possible, I wanted the all-age recommended rating. I tried to reduce the amount of bleeding, avoid cruel scenes, but that died in that scene one shot. Another problem that they had to deal with was just the large amount of data that they were trying to put on the disc. Between all of the music and voice acting, its file size was actually twice as big as Nocturne's. However, despite this, they did manage to fit the entire game on one disc, and got everything to load pretty quickly. A year after its initial release, Atlus released an extended version of Nocturne called Nocturne Maniacs on January 29, 2004, and it didn't take too long for fans of the game to find something interesting. When selecting between starting a new game or loading a previous save, players had the option to view a trailer. Because it hadn't been officially given a name yet, Satoshi Oyama, the game's chief programmer, had to decide what to call it when he cut the trailer. At the end, he wrote something like Summer 2004, New Goddess. News of the trailer reached Western outlets the following week, and a week after that, Atlus officially announced the name of this project, Digital Devil Saga Avatar Tuner. News about the game slowed down until the end of April, when Sony's E3 games lineup was leaked. According to Andrew Long, senior editor of RPG Gamer, a glitch at Sony's official website had caused information on the company's E3 lineup to be made available to the public. While the exploit existed, it was possible to search through Sony's various games by number and find out which would be making an appearance at the upcoming show. And game number 78 was Digital Devil Saga Avatar Tuner. The leak, unsurprisingly, was correct, and Western Games Press would get their first look at the game at E3, which took place between May 12th and May 14th that year. Atlus also announced that the game would be released in North America sometime this winter. The game's Japanese release date was announced a month after E3 and was scheduled to hit store shelves on July 15th for 7,329 yen, about $66.85 at the time. Atlus USA also announced that they would be working with Etro Anime, a New York-based drum and bass and electronic band. Their song, Danger, a single from their debut album, See the Sound, would be added to the game's soundtrack. While it had been used in the game's E3 trailer, this was official confirmation that it would actually make its way into the game. Being fans of games themselves, the band was glad to work with Atlus. Etro Anime is thrilled to contribute Danger to the soundtrack of Digital Devil Saga, since several members are video game junkies. The melancholy of the track blends well with the constant rain in the game, as does the fast tempo of drum and bass with the battle scenes. We couldn't think of a more appropriate video game to feature this song, and are looking forward to getting our hands on it. Atlus thought that the song perfectly suited the tone of the game, and we're happy to both use the song in the game's trailer and to add it to the soundtrack. Etro Anime means to be infinite, with spirit and in movement, which pretty much echoes the style of Digital Devil Saga. When it came time to put together the E3 trailer for Digital Devil Saga, we wanted a song that would capture the sci-fi theme and urgency of this truly unique game, but at the same time, outlining the main character's emotional relationship in the process. To that effect, I think we have succeeded. With the addition of Danger to an already amazing soundtrack and game, role-playing fans really have something to be excited about this winter. The game was released on its intended release date of July 15th in Japan. It was received well by critics, with Famitsu giving the game a 32 out of 40, with critics scoring the game 9, 8, 8, and 7 out of 10. It was the 81st best-selling game in Japan at the end of the year, having sold 153,421,000 copies. A couple of months after it was released, Atlus announced the sequel, Digital Devil Saga Avatar Tuner 2. It was scheduled to be released sometime in 2005. In November, a MegaTen web portal revealed that the game would be released on January 27, 2005 in Japan. Unfortunately for everyone who was expecting to play the first game that winter, it was delayed. The North American release of Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga was pushed back to spring of 2005. As a consolation, Atlus revealed that they would be releasing a deluxe box set. It would contain space for both games in the Duology and the first game's soundtrack. Digital Devil Saga 2 was also given a summer of 2005 release window. As soon as production on the first game was complete, Atlus started working on the sequel. They kept the same development structure, but some people ended up moving around. For example, Makoto Kitano was now sitting in the director's chair instead of Katsura Hashino. They implemented changes to Avatar Tuner 2 based on internal feedback they received and ideas generated during the production of the first game. Daisuke Kaneda, the event and system planning lead, wanted to make some adjustments right away. I would like to talk about the system side. After the previous work was finished, I started production of 2 immediately, but I made a big change to the system side. Mantras, karma rings, Rakshasa mode, etc. They decided to change how mantras work this time around. Instead of mantras following a linear style of progression like in the first game, they would now be much more customizable. You'd be able to select which mantras that you wanted to learn from a hexagonal grid. Because of this new grid system, you can pick and choose the mantras that you want, allowing you to obtain higher level mantras much earlier in the game. But this presented another problem. How much should all of these mantras cost? Mantras are central to the character's growth factor this time. If it is cheap, there may be a feeling that there is little sense of accomplishment, and that it should be more expensive. But if it is cheaper than that, it becomes too cheap, and gratitude becomes thin. When I was able to purchase the highest ranked mantra, I said, "Yosha, did you not think?" I wanted everyone to taste that feeling, so I thought about the balance around it and made it that price. Karma rings are accessories that you can equip that grant character bonuses. You can't equip more than one of the same rings, and they can't be sold. Their effects are also only active if they're equipped to an active party member, who isn't incapacitated, except for the Berserker ring, which works as long as it's equipped to anyone. They can also be outfitted with gems that grant additional bonuses, but each ring has a limited number of gem slots. Rakshasa mode, or Berserk mode, is a new mechanic introduced in Avatar Tuner 2. Instead of completing a full demonic transformation, there's a chance that your transformation will be incomplete. This can happen during any random encounter, and it changes the flow of the battle. In exchange for an increase in physical attack power and critical hit rate, the party's defense, accuracy, and chance of being critically hit themselves also increases. Once you enter a battle in Berserk mode, you have a choice to make. You can either flee with a nearly 100% chance to escape, or fight a high-risk, high-reward battle, because winning a fight in Berserk mode grants the party 2.5 times more experience, or karma, than usual. This mode also introduced some new challenges for the character team, according to Kaori Okita and Makoto Kitano. I value the image of a deformed person because it is the middle between the devil and the human being. I changed it into a devil's part and put a streak of light in the junction, or emphasized the gap between the size of the devil part and the human part. The eyes are shining golden, and the skin is darkened. I was worried about who and where to make the transformations, especially characters with multiple iconic parts. For Heat, is it the head, or is it an arm that emphasizes the claw? And with one leg, Gale can't stand up normally, and so on. Due to the events of the previous game, there was going to be a tonal shift in the follow-up. And Shoji Meguro wanted this to be reflected in the game's music. The emotions sprouted from the characters who had no feelings in the junkyard were human, pure, and I used a lot of rock and blues that kept the tempo down to express them. But in 2, the hard, ruthless, and murderous world, as much as possible, I made it with that in mind. Music that feels hot at the base. This transformation, in fact, has a boundary. At the end of the first game's staff roll, the ending tune gets exciting and ends with a new, techno-like song. But this changes the boundary, that's my interpretation. And I wanted to keep that momentum as it was. In 2, the battle is more painful, the event makes you cry. The field is transformed. Sound bursts with the transformation of the world. It is like music. When I worked on the theme song, I used a major debut song, Time Capsule, by an artist known as the ending theme. The new opening song was alive, and it was written by Shoji Meguro. Kyoko Momoto was the lead vocalist, and the background vocals were sung by Yumi Kawamura. And unlike the previous game, the opening songs would be the same in each region. Just like the first game, Avatar Tuner 2 was massive, and developers had trouble squeezing everything onto the disc. Toshiyuki Niida, the game's main battle and system programmer, described these development difficulties. This work is even more voluminous than the previous one. Regarding the DVD capacity, it went down to the last minute. Taking advantage of the experiences of the previous work, I decided to allocate data to some extent in advance. But in the end, the capacity expanded more and more with additional events, extra minigames, and runaway of the good feeling of the staff. There was a cold sweat into the end about whether it would fit on one disc. He would also describe some of the work that they did to fine-tune the battle system, which also shared some issues that the battle team from the first game had. The tempo is the most important part of programming the battle. We have devised various ways to save, as much as possible, the useless space that occurs during the battle. After all, the most important point is to read the data. In order to make everyone who is playing the game feel as much as possible while waiting for loading, we tried to change the timing of loading, took information from the designers, and used trial and error while aiming for a comfortable battle experience. Also, battles are doing a lot more. It was so huge that it could not be compared with the previous one. It was hard. This time, it is even more amazing. Especially the last enemy. Even though it was in the middle of development, there was so much trembling from excitement. The developers decided to add a hard mode to the game for players who were confident in their skills. And they also added something special for players who cleared the first game. All you had to do was make sure that you had the clear data on your memory card. All of their work would come to an end just over a month before the game was set to release. Development on the game concluded on December 17, 2004. Digital Devil Saga Avatar Tuna 2 was released on January 27, 2005 in Japan. In the review of the game, Dengeki PlayStation praised the game's story, new gameplay elements, and more flexible mantra system. Their main issues with the game were its similarity to its predecessor, and that the story wasn't exactly new player friendly. But overall, they really enjoyed and recommended it. It looked like fans in the West had a lot to look forward to, and it seemed like they would finally be able to mark their calendars, just before the sequel's release in Japan. IGN reached out to Atlus, who told them they were targeting a release date in late March. Bill Alexander, a QA manager and senior editor at Atlus USA, detailed the state of the game at the end of February. Currently, the game is in the process of being localized and tested. Basically, once the text has been translated and edited, then it goes to the developer for implementation into the game. Once a script has been compiled, voice recording can be done. We have completed voice recording and are prepared to begin testing the title to make sure that the English text and voices are appearing correctly. Although delays come as disappointments to gamers, they are usually for good reasons. Consumers expect the game to be error-free, and most publishers strive to reach this level of quality. Occasionally, unexpected bugs will be discovered late in the testing process, and those must be fixed. Furthermore, since the game must pass Sony's approval process, and because so many games are released before the holidays, this can sometimes cause delays. However, because releasing a game is a coordinated effort with the sales and marketing departments, a game will only be delayed if it is unavoidable. That said, we are doing our best to release the game on time. But unfortunately, the game was delayed again. However, this time, Atlus committed to a release date. On March 23, 2005, Atlus announced that Digital Devil Saga had gone gold and would be released shortly, on April 5, 2005. Fortunately, there were no more delays, and Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga was released in North America on April 5, 2005. It was generally well received by game critics at the time, receiving a score of 78 out of 100 on review aggregator Metacritic. The game was widely praised for its visuals, battle system, and storytelling. Game Chronicles gave the game a 10 out of 10, and Bonus Stage called it the best current-gen console RPG to date. However, even some who enjoyed the game criticized the way that the game's story ended, the length of the dungeons, and its high encounter rate. There were also reviewers who thought that the game's battle system was a step back from Nocturne's. Fans had reason to believe that the sequel's release wouldn't be too far off, because pre-orders for Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga 2 were listed by EB Games and GameStop, which were still separate companies at the time, in March. As expected, it made an appearance at E3 that May, but just in the form of a trailer, with no version of the game being made available for people to play. After E3, the release date was set to August 23, 2005, but it was pushed back. Things quieted down until September, when Atlus launched the official English website on September 9th. They also announced that those who pre-ordered the game would receive a soundtrack CD. The new release date was set for October 11th, and the game was expected to be shipped to retailers nationwide on Tuesday, October 4th. However, the day before the game was supposed to be shipped, Atlus shocked fans and critics by not only shipping the game a day early, making it available for sale, meaning that fans would be able to play the game a week earlier than previously expected. Digital Devil Saga 2 received an even warmer reception than its predecessor, accumulating a score of 82 out of 100 on Metacritic. The game was almost universally praised for its storytelling, and several reviewers enjoyed the game's updated mechanics. It was generally regarded as a significant improvement in both story and gameplay from the first game, although some did think that they were still a little too similar, and one thing that the sequel didn't seem to significantly improve upon was the high encounter rate. That being said, I think that the general sentiment among reviewers was summed up nicely by Eurogamer: everything that an excellent sequel should be. It takes on board criticisms leveled at the former game and addresses them in a way which should delight any fan of the series. Not only that, it picks up the story and characters of the original title and develops them in such a fascinating way that it actually throws fresh light on the original, which now seems like a much better piece of storytelling in the context of his part in the series as a whole. MegaTen fans in Europe had to wait until 2006 to get their hands on the series. Both Digital Devil Saga games were licensed by Ghostlight Interactive, but it took a while for them to actually release them. After several delays, Digital Devil Saga was released on July 28, 2006, but there were some issues. It didn't appear to have been marketed that well, especially in France. The game only ran at 50 frames per second, and it was only translated into English using the North American translation. On top of that, they had to wait until 2007 to finish the duology, with Ghostlight announcing that they'd release digital Devil Saga 2 on February 16, 2007 in November of 2006. Fortunately, there wouldn't be any delays this time around. Avatar Tuner 2 sold significantly worse than the original did in Japan, only selling 90,812 copies by the end of 2005. The game, along with other titles Atlus released during this time, failed to meet their sales targets. This contributed to a loss of profits in their gaming division, which caused Atlus to scale back production. Unfortunately, because of this cutback, Atlus laid off 30 employees, which is around 10% of their workforce. It appeared to have had a much better showing, relatively speaking, overseas though. In an interview with Gamasutra, Jim Ireton, Atlus USA's VP of Sales, said that Atlus USA's sales were up 75% in 2005, and when asked about their best-selling titles in 2005, he said, "Our flagship product in Japan is Shin Megami Tensei. We had 2 titles, Digital Devil Saga 1 and 2. Both were award-winning. Those 2 did absolutely fabulous this past year. Both games also appear to have been successful in Europe." In an interview with GamesBeat in 2013, Ross Brierley, a Ghostlight community manager, said that Shin Megami Tensei, Lucifer's Call, Nocturne in the US and Japan, and both Digital Devil Saga games had all met with great success. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of new things to talk about. The games were re-released on the PlayStation Network Store in 2014, which made them much more accessible, but came with their own issues, including slowdown and audio desyncs. For those interested in taking another look at the junkyard, Yuga Dai wrote a series of novels entitled Quantum Devil Saga, Avatar Tuner. Unfortunately, of the 5 released volumes, only the first 2 have been translated into English. That being said, one of the best things about these 2 games is that they stand alone. The games were always supposed to serve as an entry point for those who weren't familiar with other MegaTen titles. Even if they weren't able to fully satisfy that particular objective, they still had accomplished something. They made 2 really good games that, together, created an unforgettable experience.